Welcome, everyone. My name is Maya Schonbach. I'm a clinical psychologist and the clinical program director here at Stop OCD. So today we're going to talk about OCD, um, maybe in a slightly different way that people are maybe used to. So instead of focusing on how we can kind of get rid of our intrusive thoughts and the anxiety and the distress, we're going to focus on how we can change our relationship with them. So they kind of stop kind of running the show. And so really what that is all about is the basis really of ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, and mindfulness, which go hand in hand, that have been specifically adapted for OCD. And so when we go throughout the slides, the webinar today, the goal here that we're going to talk about, it isn't comfort, but the goal here is really freedom. And it's really the idea of having freedom to continue to live your life that you care about, that you value, even when dealing with OCD. So today our webinar is about 45 minutes, and I encourage you really throughout the webinar, write in any comments, any questions that you have into the chat, and we'll go through them all together at the end in a Q&A. And also, definitely stick around till the end of the presentation because I'll be giving a promo code at the end to subscribe to our program and have a discount for that. So let's get started. So let's just quickly go through a roadmap of what we'll go through today. We'll start with understanding OCD from the inside and really how ACT or acceptance and commitment therapy frames the struggle with OCD. We'll dive into what is ACT and look at some research behind that. Then we'll actually work on some practical skills, some core ACT skills, define them, kind of go through some examples of skills that we teach in ACT for specifically for OCD. We'll talk about values and committed actions and how that relates to treatment in therapy for OCD. We'll do a quick summary of key takeaways, and then, like I said, we'll do a Q&A. And definitely, please don't be shy. Write in any questions you have. So let's get started by talking a bit about OCD and learning about what ACT is. So just briefly, OCD. If you live with OCD, then this probably feels familiar. But the essential idea is that there's intrusive thoughts that feel extremely urgent. They don't just show up, they arrive with like an alarm of urgency. They feel loud, they feel convincing, urgent, time sensitive. There's often kind of a sense that I need to deal with this right now, and it feels non-negotiable. It doesn't come from logic, it comes from a place of kind of anxiety and distress. And we'll go through later the OCD cycle, but it's the way that we interpret our intrusive thoughts as something meaningful that then leads to, of course, if we interpret the intrusive thought as something meaningful, then of course we're going to feel anxious and distressed. And then the anxiety feels like a signal to do something. And so what happens is in therapy, we don't dismiss that experience, but instead of saying, okay, this is irrational, we ask, what happens when this urgency, this becomes the boss? And this is kind of the question that we want to shift and look at and tackle with acceptance and commitment therapy. So here is really the central metaphor that we'll use today. It's often a key metaphor used in acceptance and commitment therapy, not always, but something that I like to use. So it's essentially that you imagine that OCD is on the other side of a rope, and you're playing tug of war with it. So OCD pulls with all the intrusive thoughts, the intrusive images, the urges, the doubts. And on your side of the rope, you pull back. And how do you do this? You pull back by doing compulsions, by checking, by asking for reassurance, by avoiding, by trying to neutralize, by overanalyzing. So this pulling that we're doing, that's not weakness, okay? This is effort though. But the issue here is the harder that you pull, the more stuck that you become. Your feet, you dig your feet in, your body leans, all your energy goes into not falling into this big pit. And so ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy, in this therapy, we ask a question and we say, what if this struggle itself, playing this tug of war, is the trap? What if that is the trap that we have to deal with? Okay, so let's start by clearly defining what ACT is. And again, if you have any questions, write them into the chat. So ACT stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. So it's an evidence-based behavioral therapy that comes from the same family as CBT, but it has a specific emphasis. So rather than focusing primarily on changing content of thoughts or doing specifically behavioral treatments, trying to make maybe uncomfortable feelings go away. In ACT, we focus on how we relate to these different experiences when they show up. Um, so really, ACT is grounded in the idea that difficult thoughts and emotions are really a normal part of being human. And the question isn't whether they appear, it's what happens when they do, how we react when these difficult thoughts and emotions come up. And so, an aim or a central goal of ACT is really to help people build something called psychological flexibility, which I'll talk about in depth later. But um, really, it means the ability to stay present, to be open, to be engaged with life, even when we have these internal experiences that are uncomfortable. So, yeah, like I said, we'll just get into that specifically with OCD in a little bit today. So let's look at a little bit about history of acceptance and commitment therapy and OCD. So ACT was developed in the late 1980s and 1990s by a psychologist called Stephen Hayes and his colleagues. Here's a nice photo of him. So ACT really is grounded in behavioral science. It emerged from behavioral psychology, and really also as a response to the limits of traditional cognitive approaches. Really, especially the idea that psychological suffering, uh, it it was thought that it improved uh, primarily by changing or controlling our thoughts. That's kind of a more antiquated way of looking at things. I don't know, antiquated, but there's different waves of CBT, and this is kind of an earlier wave of thinking about it. Some people still practice that. With ACT, we focus on something else. So what we focus on with ACT is we really, like I said, we focus on how you relate to your internal experiences. So your thoughts, your emotions, your urges, your bodily sensations, and again, the idea of psychological flexibility. And what's interesting is that ACT initially was developed as something that's called a transdiagnostic model, which means that it wasn't designed for one specific diagnosis. It wasn't actually designed specifically for OCD. It was designed for OCD, general anxiety, depression, mood disorders, a wide range of mental health disorders. And then um, and what it did in those across those different disorders is or conditions is target kind of underlying psychological issues, things like experiential avoidance, things that we call cognitive fusion, rigid behavioral patterns. And then in the 2000s, it ACT was specifically adapted for OCD. It makes sense. It's a natural area to expand into. Why? Because, like we said, OCD, what happens there is it's an attempt to control our internal experiences. We have this idea of fusion or feeling that the intrusive thoughts, this misinterpretation of our intrusive thoughts as being meaningful. And there's typical avoidance of uncertainty, of distress. You don't want to feel these uncomfortable feelings. And so what do? We do a compulsion in order to reduce the distress. And so, like I said, in the early 2000s, clinicians and researchers began to explicitly use these ACT principles for OCD. Um, Often it's done in combination with exposure-based strategies. And that's important to note. Um, and um, So that is also the framework that we use here at Stop OCD is that we integrate the ACT principles with the evidence-based exposure in order to have treatment be more flexible and more sustainable and not just target the upper level symptom, but also to work on underlying psychological factors that are underlying the disorder. And I just really like this quote, oops, by Stephen Hayes. It says, "Get out of your mind and into your life." That's actually the name of one of his books. So if you are interested to learn more, you can definitely go ahead and look that up. So like I said, so once ACT was developed as a model, researchers began testing whether these ideas really translated into helping people with OCD. So I put up just, there's so many articles, journal articles, research done on this. Um, but ACT has been studied in many, many randomized control trials. There's been many systematic reviews on ACT as a treatment for OCD. And really, across studies, ACT has been shown to lead to meaningful reductions in OCD severity. And these improvements have actually been maintained over time. Um, and again, especially what's important here is that the change happens um, through improving things like psychological flexibility, again, that we'll talk about it. It helps with becoming less entangled with your intrusive thoughts, less driven by the urge to control your internal experiences. Um, and it's been studied in group-based acceptance and commitment therapy. There's been randomized controlled trials comparing ACT to relaxation training. And really, the idea is that the research supports the idea that ACT doesn't work by eliminating thoughts or anxiety. It works by helping you change the relationship to them. Um, and again, uh, all of this research guides our work here at Stop OCD because we integrate all of these techniques with, like I said, the exposure-based ERP, if you've heard of that, which is one of the most effective techniques for treating OCD, but we integrate them together in order to support engagement with the exposure rather than replacing. Okay, so let's actually talk about here what feels different when working with ACT and OCD. So, like I said, ACT doesn't change the content of your thoughts or make the uncertainty that arises with OCD disappear. What it does is it changes the relationship to what shows up internally. So in OCD, there's a very, very fast and it feels almost automatic chain that happens. So first, there's a trigger. It can be anything. It varies from person to person. Within the same person, it can also vary from day to day. Um, and that trigger leads to an intrusive thought that could be, I hope that what I just touched isn't contaminated. It could be, I hope what if I hurt my loved ones? Something like that. And then what's very important here is that we interpret in OCD, we interpret that thought as meaningful and dangerous. And if we interpret that thought as meaningful, it is something that's real or important, not real, but important. The fact that I had that thought, if I hurt my loved ones, means that maybe I actually will, then of course we're going to have a feeling of distress or danger or anxiety. And then in order to reduce that, what happens is we go into doing compulsions, which could be checking or hand washing or asking for reassurance, or mental reviews, or it could be avoidance also. And then that just leads us back into the cycle because that reduces the distress in the short run. But in the long run, it actually maintains the cycle going further and faster and faster and continuing. And so, really, what ACT does is it works right in between the space of the interpretation of the thought. Because over time, people begin to notice a pause. At the beginning, it's very, very small between the intrusive thought and the compulsion. And that pause is where something new becomes possible. Because instead of reacting automatically by intrusive thought, it feels meaningful, I feel anxious, I do a compulsion, which happens for people, it can happen in a split second. The person, after working with acceptance and commitment therapy, can notice, okay, this is my OCD showing up. This feels uncomfortable. I don't have to decide anything right now. But just that little shift is very powerful because for a lot of people with OCD, one of the most difficult things isn't the anxiety itself. It's the feeling that they feel trapped. They feel like they have no choice. They don't have freedom. And so ACT really helps to reinstate that sense of choice, that freedom to choose your behavior. And then once the choice is back, then your life doesn't have to be organized entirely around preventing discomfort and doing the compulsions and having people around you accommodate your behavior by doing the compulsions. You can start to organize your life around what matters to you, around your values, around your relationships, around growth, feeling present. Um, Even with OCD still being there. So that's also very key. We're not saying we're going to get rid of all the doubt and all of the intrusive thoughts. No, that happens. I can share that I don't personally live with OCD, but I have intrusive thoughts sometimes. And the key difference here is that I don't put meaning, I don't feel that my intrusive thoughts have meaning. The fact that I think that if I'm driving the car, all of a sudden an intrusive thought or image of me getting into an accident doesn't, I know and I feel that it doesn't mean that that will happen or that I actually want to or that I'm dangerous. And so again, that's that shift and that gap that prevents you from doing a compulsion, that prevents the cycle from going on. Again, right into the chat if any of you have any questions because I just threw a lot of information at you guys. Okay, so let's start by looking at some core skills that we learn in acceptance and commitment therapy in the context of OCD. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, psychological flexibility is a key skill here, and that is really the capacity to stay open, to stay aware, to be have your values guide you, even in the presence of discomfort. And so this really is a key change for somebody that's living with OCD. Um, so, um, like I said, so ACT really helps to loosen this automatic chain. And then over time, people learn that they can still experience anxiety or doubt or urges and then choose how to respond. And that's really the flexibility that we're talking about. And then that shift um, really create something, like I said, this idea of choice. And then, so this idea of having this flexibility in terms of how you choose to react and behave and think when an intrusive thought arises really is a key, um, a key concept in acceptance and commitment therapy. Okay, so let's look at flexibility versus OCD because it can kind of sound like a nice idea until what you really see what it looks like in real life with OCD. So OCD really pulls you toward certainty and the need to know and figure things out. So not just I'd like to know, but kind of I need to know. It really pulls you, OCD pulls you towards control and the sense that if I just do the right thing, if I just do the one compulsion, then my uncomfortable feelings will go away and I'll finally feel safe. The idea of neutralizing the discomfort, neutralizing the anxiety, the distress. OCD also pulls you towards avoidance. Like I said, it's compulsions or avoidance behaviors. It could be avoiding triggers altogether, um, avoiding situations, sensations, memories, people, responsibilities, anything that might trigger the intrusive thoughts or any doubt. And then that in of itself, when you start to avoid, you start to shrink down your life more and more and more until it's relatively small and led controlled by all of your compulsions. Um, and so really here, all of these, like I said, all of the strategies of OCD, they work maybe in the short term, they do provide some relief. And that's really why OCD is so compelling, because if I just check, I'll just get some relief. If I just get reassurance, then my anxiety will drop for a minute. Or if I avoid, I won't feel the spike in my anxiety right now. So really, OCD, like I said, trains the brain. Do it again, do it again, do it again. And then over time, really the cost is that your life gets smaller and smaller and smaller, shrinks down, down, down. Again, I don't want to say that that means that somebody's weak. It doesn't mean that they're not trying. It really is because our brain tells us that our system needs to be organized around this goal of never feeling discomfort or never feeling uncertainty. Okay, so that's what OCD pulls us towards. Now, compare that with psychological flexibility. So, flexibility doesn't mean that you stop caring, okay? It doesn't mean that you stop wanting to feel safe. What it does mean is that in the moment when OCD pulls, like with the metaphor of the tug of war, the intrusive thought comes up and you feel the alarm bells going off. Instead, you get access to something that OCD tries to take away from you. It gives you choice in the moment. Instead of feeling, I need to do this compulsion, flexibility adds, okay, you saying to yourself, I'm noticing that I'm feeling the urge to do a compulsion and I can choose my next move. That's the choice, the flexibility. And so flexibility, this psychological flexibility, it includes this idea of willingness, which is a really important idea also in ACT. So it really means that I can allow myself to be uncomfortable here without letting it decide what I do. It's willingness to feel discomfort. Um, and then when you add in values, later on we'll talk about that. So you say, if I'm not letting the OCD decide, what do I want to do? How do I want to move forward? So really a big shift is from OCD asking, how do I get rid of this feeling as fast as possible? Then flexibility really is asking, what matters here? How do we move towards what matters, even with this uncomfortable feeling present? And so if we look back at the tug of war, OCD says, pull harder, get certainty, make it stop, make the anxiety stop. And then flexibility says, notice the pull, loosen your grip, and choose where you want to go next. And again, this isn't a judgment. This is like kind of more like a map of like what can happen. Because once you can recognize the, oh, this is OCD pulling, it becomes easier to practice the skills that we're going to talk about next. I'm not going to give it away, but the skills that we're going to talk about next. Okay, so another skill, acceptance. Shocking. That's in the name of the therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy. I kind of like it in this image. So, um, acceptance doesn't mean that the OCD disappears. The monster's still here. The pit, the hole is still here. What has changed isn't the situation, but it's really the relationship between the person and the OCD. So acceptance is really the moment that the person stops pulling. So like I said, in OCD, you're playing tug of war, you're playing tug of war, you're checking, you're doing compulsions, you're neutralizing, you're avoiding, you're trying to get some certainty before you do something else. And again, like I said, that makes sense. You get short-term relief. But over time, it maintains the struggle over and over and over. And so acceptance really is about letting go of the rope, letting the rope fall, not because you agree with the OCD and not because you like feeling uncomfortable, but because you recognize that the pulling has been costing you your life. So again, look in the image. The person isn't collapsing on the ground. They're standing upright, their hands are free. And really that's the definition of acceptance and act. It's the allowing of thoughts, of feelings, of urges to be present without needing to act in order to control or to eliminate them. And then having the psychological flexibility and being able to choose how you want to live. So this isn't passive, and it's important for me to emphasize that dropping the rope doesn't mean giving up, okay? It's a deliberate, values-based decision to stop fighting the OCD monster. It's really a fight that you can't win because it's just you're in a cycle, you're trapped in the cycle. And then really this moment of when you drop the rope allows other for you to use other techniques that we're going to talk about today. Okay, so let's talk now about shifting about perspective and how you can change how you really relate to your mind. Okay, so now that we've talked really about acceptance, about dropping the rope, the next question that typically naturally comes up is, okay, so if I'm not fighting my thoughts, what am I supposed to do with them? Makes a lot of sense. And so this is where this idea of self as context comes in. So the self as a context is one of a really important and maybe misunderstood concept in ACT, especially for OCD. So OCD, like I said, it doesn't just bring these intrusive thoughts, it brings all these interpretations and kind of like stories about what those thoughts mean. So it could be like we can call them stories. It could be something like, okay, if I'm having this thought, then something is really wrong with me. Okay? Or this thought says something about who I really am. Or if I can't trust myself if my mind thinks this. And so self as context, it kind of offers a different perspective. So instead of asking, what is my mind saying? You start asking, okay, from where am I noticing this? So ACT makes a distinction between really the context of experience, um, which are your thoughts, urges, and feelings, the and the self, the part of you that notices these experiences, the self as the context of the experience versus the self as the context. It's a little confusing, but the idea of your thoughts, urges, and feelings being separate from you, which is kind of like an observer that is noticing these events happening. Thoughts happen, urges happen, anxiety happens, but you, the self, are the one that's noticing all of this. And this doesn't make the thoughts disappear, but it can change how seriously you have to take them. And this is crucial in OCD because the OCD, it really tries to collapse kind of the thoughts and your identity into one thing. And this idea of self as context, it separates them. It says, I'm having this thought, but I am more than just this thought. And again, we can notice how this is different from acceptance because acceptance is about not fighting what shows up, right? Letting go of the rope. And self as context is about not being defined by what shows up. And so, like I wrote here, thoughts happen in you, not as you. Okay. And a nice metaphor that I like is to picture this kind of as the sky and the weather. So the thoughts, the emotions, your urges, they're kind of like the weather patterns. Some are calm, some are stormy. So here on this side, we see the right side, we see the calm. On the left side, we see the storm. Um, but the sky is always there. The sky doesn't try to stop the storm or to argue with it. It simply has room for it. And it's the same way. You are not your thoughts or your emotions. You are the space in which they show up. And really, this shift is so important in relating to OCD differently and to your OCD experiences to notice them without being defined or controlled by them. Okay, again, this was a lot of information in one slide. If you have any questions, comments, write them in. Okay, so now that we've talked about the self as context, and that's kind of like where we are standing as an observer of our inner experience, then we can really talk about how to work with these thoughts when they show up. And this is where something called cognitive defusion comes in. So, cognitive or diffusion really means creating space between you and your thoughts. So in OCD, thoughts don't just appear, they come up with this urgency, this authority. They sound convincing, they feel meaningful, they feel important, urgent. Um, and so OCD thoughts kind of have this interpretation or rule. So if I'm thinking this, I have to do something about it. Okay? And then diffusion, it challenges this rule because it says that you don't argue with the thought, you don't try to get rid of it by using a compulsion. But again, we change how we relate to it. So we don't ask, is this thought true? Or how do I make this go away? We say, can I notice this thought as a thought? And so a really simple but powerful example, it seems very simple, but it's hard to put into practice, is adding the phrase, I'm having the thought that. So instead of thinking maybe, what if I hurt someone? It becomes, I'm having the thought that I might hurt someone. Nothing about the content of the thought changes, but really the relationship changes. You step back from the thought. Um, and really, again, that's what's so important because treating in OCD, you treat the thoughts as facts, and that's what keeps the cycle going. And then diffusion, it makes you realize that thoughts are mental events. It's not a command, it's not a fact. You can step back from it. You don't have to automatically obey your mind just because it's yelling at you. I'm not saying it's not yelling at you. Your mind is yelling at you. It feels like an alarm bell going off. Um, but you can take the step back from it. And then again, it's important to say that diffusion is not reassurance. And it doesn't mean that I'm convincing myself that the thought is untrue. Um, it's not telling yourself that it's not going to happen or proving the OCD wrong, but it's saying my mind is producing a thought and I don't have to act on it. Okay, so let's go through them. So acceptance is letting go of the rope. I'm not fighting the thoughts. Self as context is about not being defined by my thoughts. The fact that I have a thought doesn't mean that doesn't define who I am. It's not my identity and my thoughts are separate. And then cognitive diffusion is kind of like taking a step back from them and not being pushed around by your thoughts. Um, and so in our program in Stop OCD, we have all of these practical tools that you can use either on the website or in your app that help you practice cognitive diffusion in different ways. They're really to help you create space between you and the thought. So the thought, again, can be there without automatically driving your behavior, you to do compulsions. And then, like I said, over time, this makes it easier to respond to OCD thoughts, again, with the key term of psychological flexibility with choice, instead of getting pulled into the loop and the struggle or the tug of war. Okay, so now let's look at mindfulness. So this is also a very important skill in ACT, something that really helps us notice. Um, so mindfulness really is all about noticing our thoughts, our urges, sensations as they arise right now in real time without immediately reacting to them. Okay, and I want to be clear about what that means in the context of OCD in act, sorry, because this is also something that people often get confused. So mindfulness in act, um, it's not a relaxation technique. We're not trying to calm ourselves down, especially in OCD. We don't want to do things to reduce the distress because that is often a compulsion. Not often, that is the definition of a compulsion. Um, so mindfulness isn't about clearing your mind or getting rid of the intrusive thoughts. Mindfulness is about noticing what's happening as it's happening with openness and with curiosity. That's also important instead of immediately reacting to what's happening. Um, so again, the issue with OCD is that often the moment that thoughts or urges appear, your body feels like it's reacting automatically because the you interpret the thought as meaningful. You feel anxiety, distress, the urgency kicks in, and the behavior follows. Makes sense. And so mindfulness introduces something very small and powerful. It's a pause. And that pause can be maybe a second, 2 seconds. And again, this pause helps us, give us the psychological flexibility, gives us the choice. So instead of saying, the thought is here, I need to act on it, we notice a thought happened. I feel the urge to, feel anxiety. I feel an urge to do a compulsion, to wash my hands, to turn the light switch off and on. And we notice these experiences, as sensations or images or thoughts, as words, but not as commands. Um, and so this is kind of similar to diffusion, but diffusion is about how we relate to thoughts, and mindfulness is about how we relate to the entire moment. So all of your thoughts and feelings and sensations. And so mindfulness helps us really stay present long enough to choose something other than your compulsion and your OCD. And so really we want to, again, we're not making OCD disappear, but we're creating space before we react. Um, and so I want to practice this together. We'll put all these skills together in a really short practice. Again, just to see how it feels, to notice and to hopefully respond differently when OCD shows up. Okay, so I'll guide this briefly. You're welcome to participate in, again, whatever way feels comfortable. So if closing your eyes doesn't feel right, you can keep them open, maybe just soften your gaze, look down. So I want you to first bring your attention to the present moment. Notice that you're sitting here, listening and breathing. Now gently notice if there's any thought, feeling, or sensation that's present right now. You don't need to go looking for something. Just notice whatever's already here. If you notice a thought, silently name it. Say, I'm noticing a thought. If you notice an urge, you might name it. Say, I'm noticing an urge to yourself. You notice anxiety or discomfort, you can say to yourself, I'm noticing a feeling. There's no need to analyze it, no need to decide what it means. Just notice and name. Now gently bring your attention back to the present moment. Notice your breath, the feeling of your body in the chair, the sound of my voice. If your mind pulls you away again, that's not a mistake. That's not a failure. That's the practice. Each time you notice and return to the present moment, You're strengthening the skill of not reacting automatically. This is what mindfulness is, what diffusion is, self is context. This is what they are in real time. You're not stopping the thoughts, you're noticing them and choosing where you put your attention next. Now take one more breath, and when you're ready, open your eyes and bring your attention fully back here. Okay, so if you'd like to share how you feel, write into the chat how that was, if you had any experience with that before, if you've had experience with mindfulness, how, if it was any different to notice and then silently name to yourself. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about another aspect of ACT, really about moving towards what matters or values. So, um, let's talk about really why all of these skills matter, because again, ACT isn't about coping better with OCD. It's also about living a meaningful life, even when OCD is present. So, values aren't goals that you kind of complete or check off on a list. They're kind of ongoing directions. They're kind of ways of being in the world. And what's important to say is that values are chosen by you. So, for example, they could be being a caring parent, being an engaged partner, being honest, curious, creative, things like that. And often OCD comes and takes over our values and replaces them with a different kind of priority. Things like stay safe, get certainty, don't feel anxious. And then, like we talked about, your life starts to revolve around managing your distress rather than living your life meaningfully. And so ACT helps us ask a different question, saying, if OCD wasn't making the decisions, what would matter to me? And so values really help us answer that question about what do I care about? Um, they tell us how I want to show up. Um, how I want to show up, how I want to act, even when feelings are uncomfortable. And so it's important. Values don't make anxiety go away. Like I said, this isn't what ACT is about. But it makes the anxiety worth carrying. Because once our values are clear, once we define them, then the skills that we've talked about, the acceptance, the diffusion, the mindfulness, they're not abstract. They become kind of tools that are in service of something meaningful. And again, like these values give you direction to the path that you keep walking, even when the weather, like we said with the metaphor of the weather on the sky, even when there's storms in the sky. Okay. And so um now let's talk about committed action. So this is kind of the next step, how we put values into action. So committed action doesn't mean dramatic change or forcing yourself to do everything at once. And it definitely doesn't mean also waiting until everything is ready or feeling calm. That's kind of like the two ends of the spectrum. So what it means is taking small intentional steps that are guided by your values, even when your discomfort is present. And so this is where ACT aligns very closely with exposure therapy, but it has a different emphasis. So instead of asking, how do I get my anxiety down? A committed action asks, okay, so if anxiety is here anyway, how do I want to show up? How do I want to move? How do I want to act? So maybe instead of, so a committed action could be, so instead of while having a conversation with somebody, instead of mentally checking, or touching something without washing right away, um, then it means showing up with meaningfully even when feeling anxious. Because, not because your anxiety is gone, but because your values matter more than your OCD's demands. And again, your relief may not follow, and that's okay. But again, it's important to understand that the motivation is your value. And really, it's the idea that instead of if you take a value-based step without pulling on the rope, then you teach your brain something new that you say, I can feel this anxiety and still live. So again, it's kind of showing you how ACT in all doesn't promise comfort. It offers a way forward, a different way forward. So let's just look about how this could look up in real life and it can show up in really ordinary everyday moments. So um, if OCD kind of says to you, do one more, do something else to feel sure. Um, so for example, if somebody with harm-related OCD, um, it could be allowing a disturbing thought to be present without mentally reviewing it or analyzing it or seeking reassurance, and then continuing to interact, like I said, in the conversation with the people around them, or somebody with contamination OCD. It could be maybe touching something and waiting before washing. Maybe not to prove anything and not to feel calm, but to practice living without letting the fear dictate your behavior. Um, and so really these are what's important here is that these choices are made on purpose. And again, that's really the idea of it goes together with the psychological flexibility here is that here you're taking a committed action towards living your life with your values, and that is having this choice of how you act instead of doing the compulsions that are dictated by OCD's demands. So let's go quickly through some key takeaways and then we'll get into the conclusion. So, first is that ACT focuses on changing your relationships to your thoughts, not eliminating them. So, intrusive thoughts and urges may continue to show up, but ACT helps you respond to them differently. Very important. Psychological flexibility, we talked about that as a skill that really weakens OCD over time. It's really the ability to stay open to discomfort, to be aware of the present moment, and to be guided by values that allows you to create more choice and react less automatically. We talked about acceptance. Remember, with the tug of rope metaphor, it means letting go of the rope. It's an active stance. Remember, we said the person is standing up, his hands are open. It's not giving up. In acceptance, we make room for the anxiety or the uncertainty. And in that space, then you can then step out of the struggle with the OCD and live and engage with your life. And then we talked about values and committed actions and how values provide direction when certainty is impossible. Certainty, there's never 100% certainty in life. And so ACT really helps you move toward what matters, even when OCD is really loud and yelling at you, and it causes a lot of discomfort. And a really important final takeaway that I want you to go with is that ACT is a practice. It's not a performance. Progress in ACT isn't about doing it perfectly. It's about repeatedly choosing flexibility, the psychological flexibility choice over the control that OCD has over you. So here are just some free resources that we provide. So on our website, you can also see, oh, and on our YouTube page, you can see recordings of past webinars. We have things about exposure and response prevention, all about, we have lots of webinars on mindfulness techniques also, many different ones. And I really encourage you guys to follow us on social media. It's a really great opportunity for community, comprehensive center for information, for treatment options. Really suggest that. And like I said, here is the promo code for a $100 discount of your first month. So using ProWeb100. And if you have any questions about signing up for our program, definitely email support@stopocd.com. That's our customer support. And if you have anything more private or clinical that you want to ask me, you can send me an email to maya@helpingminds.com and I'd be happy to get in touch. So if you have any questions now, um, definitely let's check the chat. I don't know why. Oh, here we go. There's no questions. I'll give it a few moments to see. Somebody asked, is there a recording? Yes, the recording is, I'm recording it right now, and we will be sending this around to everyone that signed up, and we will also be posting it on our YouTube page and on our website. Great question. Somebody asked, how do we determine our values during a conversation? So that's a great question. How do we determine our values? So that is something that can take some time. Um, so what we do at Stop OCD is we actually have you work with a therapist, um, and you definitely talk all about your different values. We have tools that help you prioritize your values. Um, it takes a lot of introspection and work. Sometimes working with a therapist is very helpful with that. Um, yeah. So I hope that helped. It's kind of a big question for you. Somebody else wrote, I'm a psychotherapist and just started working with a harm OCD client. Can you remind of resources and are you in Canada? I personally am not in Canada. I actually was born in Canada though, in Toronto. Very cool. Um, but so yes, we have definitely lots of resources. I would suggest checking out our website, stopocd.com. Um, and if you want to recommend your client to actually follow us on social media, or even to look up on our YouTube, stopocd.com, we have past webinars. They're also on our website. Great resources there. We also have a blog with lots of information about big things in OCD, exposure and response prevention, different techniques, um, OCD and other um, co-occurring disorders. Hope that helps. Is ACT suitable for neurodivergent adults? I believe there is research done on using ACT for with people with neurodivergent adults. I could look if you want me to look up specific resources. Send me an email. I'll go back to my email slide. Send me an email, and I could look those up. Um, I can't think of any off the top of my head any results about that, but it definitely is. I know with if we're talking about the autism spectrum disorder, then typically behavioral techniques are often very important, but for sure ACT techniques can definitely be used there as well. Um, Is there any way of dealing with intrusive thoughts based on things that happen in real life? Thank you. Yes, there definitely is. The techniques that we used, remember, if I can go back to where the slide is, but here, um, we have here the trigger. So intrusive thoughts happen from triggers, and triggers can be anything that happens in real life. And so, really it has to be with the idea of how much meaning we place on our thoughts. And that's where we can use all of these techniques to respond to how we treat and react to our thoughts and create the space. Great question. Great. I'm happy that I helped. Um, does OCD have genetics and or cultural exposures to activate it? So OCD definitely has there's research that shows that OCD has a genetic component. There's higher uh, rates of OCD among people among family members with that have people with other family members that have OCD. So studies definitely show that there is. Um, and cultural exposure, as in maybe asking about nature versus nurture. So yes, definitely there is could be cultural impacts. The issue is that we don't really know a lot about where it really comes from. It's just kind of like a confluence of a lot of different factors. So we have time for two more questions. So how to practice cognitive flexibility on a daily basis. Is there any websites, books? So yeah, so definitely, like I said, Stephen Hayes has lots of books, written lots of books all about ACT. And if you're into practicing it on a daily basis, websites, I would definitely sign up for Stop OCD. You can talk to your therapist every single day. And we have lots of tools, like I said, that work specifically with all of these techniques that we talked about today, cognitive diffusion, values, mindfulness. So definitely would recommend that. Last question is what about years and years and years of trauma and abuse and operating on those triggers? Not quite sure. Cost of some. Um, okay. Sorry, let's go back to this. The cost of stop OCD, it varies in terms of the cost. Provide the I would provide your client with the customer support because in case there is need for financial aid, we could definitely provide that. And also, I have the $100 discount. So I would just maybe screenshot this slide and then definitely need for financial aid. Okay, great. So I would definitely screenshot this slide, send it to your client, and tell them to contact customer support, ask them about financial aid, tell them they have a $100 discount, and ask about what the fee would be. And in terms of working with trauma, we have therapists that have lots of experience with working with trauma, uh, trauma, uh, fo- uh, trauma-informed therapy, therapists that don't work with EMDR specifically in the program, but have lots of training. So definitely hand in hand. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining. I'm really happy that you all came and asked questions and engaged, and hope that you enjoyed. Thank you, everybody.